My husband stood up at our Easter brunch and announced he was restructuring our family business. I needed to step down, he said. His consultant Natasha would be taking over my position. Our children's forks froze halfway to their mouths. I set down my mimosa, walked to my purse and handed him an envelope. Since we're making business announcements in front of the family, I said quietly. Inside were the incorporation papers showing I'd already transferred the company into my name alone. The dining room at Riverside Country Club smelled like fresh lilies and honey-glazed ham. I'd been up since 6 that morning, coordinating with the event staff to make sure everything was perfect for our annual Easter celebration. 23 members of Richard's extended family, plus my parents and sister, all gathered around tables draped in pale yellow linens. The kind of picture-perfect family gathering you'd see in a magazine. "Melissa, could you pass the rolls?" Richard's mother asked, smiling at me from across the table. She'd worn her best pearls for the occasion, the ones Richard's father had given her 40 years ago. I handed her the basket, watching Richard check his phone for the 8th time since we'd sat down. His leg was bouncing under the table, that telltale sign he was anxious about something. After 17 years of marriage, I knew his patterns better than he knew them himself. Our daughter Olivia was home from Georgetown for the holiday, looking radiant in a spring dress she'd picked out during our mother-daughter shopping trip last month. Tyler had driven up from Chapel Hill the night before, already sporting a tan from spring break in Florida. Seeing them both at the same table again, laughing with their cousins, made every minute of party planning worthwhile. "Everything looks beautiful, Mom," Olivia said, squeezing my hand. "You really outdid yourself this year." Tyler raised his orange juice glass. "To Mom, for pulling off another perfect holiday." I clinked my glass against his, savoring this moment before everything changed. Because I knew it was about to change. I'd seen the signs all morning. The way Richard kept smoothing his tie. The forced cheerfulness in his voice. The way he'd positioned himself at the head of the table like he was about to conduct a board meeting instead of enjoying Easter brunch with his family. Richard's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, and something shifted in his expression. I watched him take a long breath. The kind he took before delivering bad news to clients. "Actually," he said, standing up so abruptly his chair scraped against the polished floor. The conversation around us died instantly. "Everyone, I have an announcement to make." My stomach tightened, but I kept my face neutral. This was it. The moment I'd been preparing for since October. As you all know, Rich Tech Solutions has been my life's work for the past 15 years. Richard's voice had that practiced smoothness he used in business presentations. And Melissa has been an integral part of that journey. Had been. Past tense. I set down my fork carefully. But businesses evolve. Markets change. Richard continued, looking everywhere except at me. And sometimes, to move forward, we need to make difficult decisions about leadership and structure. My father's hand had gone still on his water glass. My sister Sarah's eyes were wide, flicking between Richard and me. "I've brought on a consultant over the past several months," Richard said, his confidence growing with each word. "Natasha Volkov. She's brilliant, cutting edge, exactly what the company needs to scale to the next level. And after careful consideration, I've decided that Melissa will be stepping down from her role as COO. Natasha will be taking over operations effective immediately." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the fountain outside, the distant clinking of dishes from the kitchen, the sound of my own heartbeat. Olivia's face had gone pale. "Dad, what are you talking about?" But Richard wasn't done. His phone buzzed again and he glanced at it, a small smile playing at his lips. "This restructuring is necessary for the company's future. Melissa can focus on personal projects, maybe some volunteer work. The business world is demanding, and I need someone who can keep up with the pace." My mother made a small sound, almost a gasp. "But Melissa built that company with you." Richard finally looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw what I'd been seeing for months. Dismissal. The assumption that I would sit quietly and accept whatever he decided. That I was too passive, too devoted to our family, too invested in keeping the peace to fight back. I stood up slowly. My legs were steady, my hands calm. I picked up my clutch from the back of my chair and pulled out the cream-colored envelope I'd been carrying for 3 weeks. "Since we're making business announcements at family gatherings," I said, my voice clear and measured, "I thought you should see these." I walked around the table and placed the envelope directly in front of his plate, on top of the partially eaten eggs Benedict he'd barely touched. The papers inside, I continued, meeting his eyes, show the new incorporation structure of Rich Tech Solutions, filed with the state on March 15th. You'll notice your name appears as a consultant. Mine appears as sole owner and CEO. Richard's hand shook as he picked up the envelope. What? I'd recommend reviewing them carefully, I said, sitting back down and taking a sip of my mimosa, especially the section about intellectual property rights. Turns out, when you build a company's entire software infrastructure, you own the patents. And when you file those patents in your name alone, you own the company. The color drained from Richard's face as he fumbled with the envelope. Tyler was staring at his father with an expression I'd never seen before. Dad, is this real? Are you seriously trying to push Mom out of her own company? It's complicated, Richard started, but Olivia cut him off. How is it complicated? She created the entire platform. She built every system from the ground up while you handled sales and marketing. That's when Richard's phone started buzzing insistently. He looked at the screen and I saw the name flash across it. Natasha, even now, even in the middle of destroying our family's Easter celebration, she couldn't leave him alone for one meal. Answer it, my father said coldly. Don't let us interrupt your important business. Richard declined the call, his jaw clenched. This isn't the time or place. My mother's voice was ice. You made it the time and place when you announced you were removing your wife from the company you built together. The phone buzzed again. And again. And again. Richard's composure was cracking. He kept glancing at the envelope, at his phone, at the shocked faces around the table. His mother had tears in her eyes. His brother Mike was shaking his head slowly, disappointment written all over his face. 17 years, Richard, my sister Sarah said quietly. 17 years of marriage. And this is how you treat her. Tyler stood up, his napkin falling to the floor. I've lost my appetite. He looked at his father with barely controlled anger. You know what the worst part is? You thought Mom would just take it. You thought she'd smile and accept being erased from her own creation. Son, you don't understand. Richard started. I understand perfectly. Tyler's voice was sharp. You wanted to replace Mom with your side piece and expected us all to just go along with it because you decided it was what's best for the business. Richard's phone was vibrating continuously now. He finally grabbed it and stepped away from the table. I can't talk right now, he hissed into the phone. But we could all hear Natasha's voice through the speaker, sharp and impatient. I could make out only fragments of words, but the tone was clear. She was not happy about being ignored. When Richard returned to the table, there was sweat beading on his forehead. He picked up the envelope again, pulling out the documents with shaking hands. I watched him read. Watched his eyes scan the legal language, the corporate structure, the patents listed under my name. Watched the moment he realized what I'd done. You can't do this, he whispered. The company is joint marital property. I took another sip of my drink, letting him sweat. Actually, the intellectual property was created before we married. The original code, the algorithms, the entire foundation? All mine. I had an attorney review our corporate structure in October. Turns out, you never bothered to properly file the partnership agreement. Legally, I've always been the sole owner. You were operating on my goodwill. Richard's brother Mike leaned forward. Is this true, Rich? You've been running a company you don't actually own? It was supposed to be ours, Richard said, his voice desperate now. We built it together. And you destroyed it together when you decided your consultant was more important than your wife, my father said flatly. The rest of Easter brunch was excruciating. Most of the family made polite excuses and left early. Richard sat in his chair, staring at the legal documents, while his phone continued to buzz with increasingly frantic messages from Natasha. I stayed until the end, helping clean up, thanking the staff, playing the gracious hostess even as my marriage dissolved around me. Because that's who I was. Professional, composed, strategic. It wasn't until I was driving home alone, Olivia and Tyler having left together to talk, that I let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. Not the business revelations. I'd been preparing for that. But the public nature of Richard's betrayal. The casual cruelty of trying to erase me in front of our family. That night, I lay in bed in the guest room, the door locked, listening to Richard pace in his study downstairs. Let him pace. Let him wonder. Let him call Natasha and explain why his grand restructuring plan had just blown up in his face. The affair had started in September. I'd pinpointed the exact week when everything changed, though I didn't know what had changed yet, only that something had. Richard came home from a business conference in Austin with a new energy. He'd always been ambitious, but this was different, manic almost. He started working later, leaving earlier, taking calls in his car instead of his office. I remember the first time I heard her name. Melissa, I've hired this incredible consultant, Natasha Volkov. She specializes in scaling tech startups, has connections in Silicon Valley, experience with companies that have gone from 6 figures to 8 figures in under 2 years. That's wonderful, I'd said, genuinely pleased. Our company had plateaued at around $2 million in annual revenue. The idea of bringing in outside expertise made sense. She's brilliant, he'd continued, his eyes bright. Fresh perspective, innovative strategies. She thinks we're sitting on a gold mine that just needs the right development approach. The late nights began shortly after. Client presentations, he'd say. Strategy sessions with Natasha. Investor calls that somehow always ran until midnight. I'd started to notice the changes in October. The way he showered immediately when he came home instead of collapsing on the couch like he used to. The new cologne I'd never bought him. The gym membership he suddenly took seriously after years of promising to get in shape. But it was the credit card statement that really opened my eyes. I'd been reviewing our finances, something I did monthly since I handled our accounting, when I noticed charges I didn't recognize. Dinner at Marcel's, the most expensive French restaurant downtown, on a Tuesday when Richard had claimed to be working late at the office. $437 for a meal I'd never eaten. Hotel charges at the Sutton, our city's boutique luxury hotel. Jewelry purchases from Cartier. Flowers from an upscale florist, sent to an address I didn't recognize. I'd sat at my desk, staring at the statement, feeling the foundation of my reality shift beneath me. This wasn't just overwork or stress. This was systematic deception. That weekend, while Richard was supposedly golfing with clients, I did what I'd never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. Karen Williams came recommended by my college roommate who'd gone through a messy divorce 3 years earlier. Karen was professional, discreet, and brutally honest. Mrs. Morrison, she'd said during our first meeting at a coffee shop across town, I need you to understand that sometimes what we find is worse than what you suspect. Are you prepared for that? I'd nodded, my hands wrapped around a latte I couldn't taste. I need to know the truth. The truth came in photographs. Richard and Natasha at Marcel's, her hand on his arm. Richard and Natasha, leaving the Sutton together at 10 in the morning. Richard and Natasha at a jewelry store, him slipping a diamond bracelet onto her wrist while she laughed. But the worst photo was the casual one. Them at a coffee shop on a Sunday morning, sharing a newspaper and croissants, looking like any normal couple enjoying a lazy weekend. The intimacy of it hurt more than the fancy dinners and expensive gifts. This wasn't just an affair. This was a relationship. Karen had provided more than photos. She documented a pattern of financial transfers. Small amounts at first. 500 here, 1,000 there. Then larger sums. 5,000 to cover Natasha's student loans. 8,000 for her car down payment. 15,000 that Richard had classified as a business loan but had gone directly to Natasha's personal account. My husband wasn't just cheating. He was funding his mistress's lifestyle with our joint income with profits from the company I'd built. That's when I'd called Karen back and asked for a different kind of help. Not a divorce attorney, not yet. First, I needed to protect what was mine. She'd connected me with Patricia Chen, a corporate attorney who specialized in intellectual property and business ownership disputes. Patricia had spent 3 weeks reviewing every document related to Rich Tech Solutions. Corporate filings, partnership agreements, patent applications, trademark registrations, the original business plan I'd drafted 17 years ago. Her findings were illuminating. Richard had never properly filed the partnership paperwork. The company existed in a legal gray area where I was the de facto owner because I'd registered the original business, developed all the proprietary technology, and held all the patents in my name. You have options, Patricia had said during our consultation. We can formalize his ownership stake, negotiate a fair split, go the traditional divorce route, or, she'd paused, we can clarify the existing structure in your favor. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Clarify the existing structure. Over the next 3 months, while Richard played house with Natasha and planned to push me out of my own company, I'd been busy too. Filing amended corporate documents, transferring patents, securing accounts, building an impenetrable legal fortress around everything I'd created. The irony was poetic. Richard thought he was being strategic, slowly easing me out so he could install his mistress without opposition. He had no idea I was 3 steps ahead, documenting everything, protecting everything, preparing for the inevitable moment when he'd make his move. That moment came at Easter brunch, with 23 witnesses and a mimosa in my hand. The week after Easter was chaos. Richard moved out on Tuesday, taking only his clothes and leaving behind 17 years of shared memories like they were someone else's property. He rented a condo downtown, probably splitting the cost with Natasha, though I didn't ask and didn't care. Olivia called me every night that week. "Mom, are you okay?" Her voice was small, worried. She was 22 years old and watching her family implode. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I'd reassure her. "Better than fine, actually. This has been coming for a long time. I can't believe Dad would do this." She'd been crying. I could hear it in her voice. "To you, to us, to the company you built together." Tyler was angrier. He'd called Richard once, a conversation that lasted 30 seconds. "You chose her over Mom," he'd said flatly. "Don't call me until you're ready to apologize properly." My parents had rallied around me with quiet strength. My father, a retired engineer who'd taught me to code when I was 12, had reviewed the corporate documents himself. "Smart move," he'd said simply. "Protect what's yours." The divorce papers came on a Friday afternoon, delivered by courier. Richard was filing first, trying to control the narrative. But his petition was almost laughable in its assumptions. He was requesting 50% of the business value, spousal support, and division of all marital assets. Patricia had laughed when I'd shown her. "He still doesn't understand what he's up against." We filed our counterpetition the following Monday. Not a division of assets, but a clarification of ownership. The business was mine, had always been mine, and Richard had been operating as an employee with a generous profit-sharing arrangement that was now terminated. The real shock came in May when I got a call from Marcus Chen, one of our biggest investors. "Melissa, I need to talk to you about something concerning. Richard approached me last month trying to negotiate a buyout of your position in the company." I'd gripped the phone tighter. "When exactly?" "March 10th. He said you wanted to step back, spend more time with family. He had Natasha with him, presented her as the future COO. Marcus paused. "I didn't feel right about it, so I didn't commit. But I thought you should know." March 10th. 5 days before I'd filed the new corporate structure. Richard had been planning this for months, lining up investors, making deals, preparing to erase me from the company I'd created. And he'd been using Natasha as proof that he had a replacement ready. The betrayal cut deeper than the affair. He'd been systematically plotting to steal my life's work. But Richard had made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed I would remain the passive, supportive wife who'd always put his needs first. The woman who'd worked 80-hour weeks building the technology while pregnant with Olivia so he could focus on sales. The woman who'd taken Tyler to soccer practice between debugging sessions. The woman who'd smiled through countless client dinners while Richard took credit for innovations I'd developed. He'd assumed wrong. June brought unexpected developments. Natasha called me directly, her voice sharp and accusatory. "This is your fault. Richard promised me a future, a partnership. Now he's broke and desperate and blaming me for everything." "I don't know what you want me to say," I'd responded calmly. "You knew he was married. You knew he was lying to his family. What kind of future were you expecting to build on that foundation?" She'd hung up without another word. Through Tyler, who still occasionally spoke to his father, I learned that Natasha had left Richard the week after the Easter brunch disaster. She'd been promised an executive position and financial security. When Richard lost access to the company and its income, she'd lost interest immediately. Richard was living on credit cards now, the consultant income he'd been collecting having dried up when I terminated his company access. He'd put the condo rent on a card, car payment on a card, even groceries on a card. The luxury lifestyle he'd been funding for himself and Natasha was collapsing fast. But the karma I'd been waiting for came in July. delivered via a formal investigation notice from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Apparently, Richard's aggressive attempts to court investors had crossed several legal lines. He'd made false claims about company valuation, misrepresented ownership structure, and promised returns he had no authority to guarantee. 2 investors had filed complaints. The SEC was investigating. Patricia called me immediately. "Melissa, you need to see this. The investigation is focused entirely on Richard's actions. Your corporate restructuring happened before any of his illegal promises. You're completely insulated." I'd sat in my home office, the room where I'd built Rich Tech from the ground up, and felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Richard had destroyed himself. Not because of me, but because of his own greed and arrogance. August brought Tyler home for a visit before his junior year started. He sat with me on the back porch, where I'd been teaching myself to garden in my newfound free time. "Dad called me last week," Tyler said quietly. "He wanted me to ask you if you'd consider giving him a position at the company. Entry level. Something to help him get back on his feet." I looked at my son. This young man who looked so much like his father but had none of his weakness. "What do you think I should do?" Tyler was quiet for a long moment. "I think you should do what's best for you, Mom. Not what's best for him, not what's best for us. What's best for you." I thought about it for 3 days. Then I'd called Richard directly for the first time since Easter. His voice was hoarse when he answered. "Melissa, Tyler said you're looking for work." Silence. Then, "I made mistakes. Big ones. I'm trying to figure out how to rebuild. I'm not interested in rehashing what went wrong," I'd said. "But I need a junior developer for the new project I'm launching. It pays $45,000 a year. No benefits yet. It's entry level, and you'd be reporting to my new COO, someone who actually earned the position." More silence. Then, quietly, "Thank you. I'm not doing this for you," I'd clarified. "I'm doing it because Olivia and Tyler don't deserve to watch their father completely self-destruct. But Richard, this is your last chance. You screw this up, you're on your own." He'd started the following Monday, sitting in a cubicle, writing code under the supervision of Jennifer Park, a brilliant 28-year-old I'd promoted to COO. The man who tried to erase me was now learning what it meant to work in the company he'd almost stolen. September brought Olivia's senior year at Georgetown and new possibilities I hadn't imagined. Patricia Chen, who'd become more than just my attorney, invited me to speak at a Women in Technology conference. "Share your story," she'd said. "How you protected your intellectual property and maintained ownership in the face of corporate betrayal." I'd stood on that stage in front of 300 women and told them the truth. Not the whole messy story, but the important parts. Document everything. Know what you own. Never assume someone else will protect your interests. The response was overwhelming. 6 women approached me afterward, each with her own story of business partnership betrayals, each asking for advice on how to protect herself. That's when I realized my future wasn't just about Rich Tech. It was about helping other women avoid the trap I'd nearly fallen into. October brought leaves turning gold and crimson and Olivia's decision to defer law school for a year to work with me at the company. "I want to learn from you, Mom," she'd said. "Business, technology, strategy. Everything you know about building something that lasts." Tyler visited for fall break, bringing Sarah, a sweet pre-med student he'd been dating for 6 months. We all had dinner together on Saturday night. Olivia, Tyler, Sarah, and me. Richard had asked if he could join us, but Tyler had gently told him no. Not yet. Maybe someday, but not yet. The house felt different now. Lighter. I'd repainted the master bedroom in soft gray blue, hung art I'd chosen without consulting anyone else's opinion, and converted Richard's old study into a meditation space filled with plants and morning light. My morning routine had become sacred. Coffee on the patio, 30 minutes of coding just for fun, then whatever the day brought. Some mornings I worked on Rich Tech projects. Others I consulted with women starting their own businesses. Wednesday afternoons I volunteered at a nonprofit teaching girls to code. The divorce was finalized in November, exactly 9 months after Easter brunch. Richard got 15% of the company value, a one-time payment representing his sales contributions over the years. I got the house, the business, and my self-respect. At the final hearing, Richard had approached me in the courthouse hallway. "Melissa, I'm sorry. For all of it." I'd looked at him, This man I'd loved for 17 years, built a life with, created a family with. He looked older now, tired around the eyes. The confidence that had once attracted me was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine humility. "I know," I'd said simply. "And I hope you figure out who you want to be, Richard." Because the man who stood up at Easter brunch and tried to erase me? He wasn't the man I married, and he's not the man our children need. December brought unexpected joy. Olivia's graduation invitation arrived in the mail, scheduled for May. Tyler called to say he'd been accepted into a summer research program, and Patricia called with news that still made me smile when I thought about it. "The Women's Technology Group wants to make you their keynote speaker for the spring conference," she'd said. 3,000 attendees. They want to hear about building businesses, protecting intellectual property, and reclaiming power. I'd accepted immediately. Christmas Eve found me hosting dinner for Olivia, Tyler, Sarah, my parents, and my sister's family. We gathered around the dining room table where Richard had once sat, where he'd once belonged, but his absence felt more like relief than loss. Richard had asked if he could stop by to drop off gifts for the kids. I'd said yes, but only for an hour, and only because Olivia and Tyler had said they were ready. He arrived at 7 with wrapped packages and a humility I'd never seen before. He sat on the edge of the couch, making small talk, not trying to insert himself into our celebration but grateful to be included at the margins. When he left, Olivia hugged me tightly. "You did the right thing, Mom." Letting him see us but not letting him back in. January arrived with snow and new possibilities. Rich Tech had its best quarter ever, landing 3 major clients and securing funding to expand into artificial intelligence. Jennifer Park was exceeding every expectation as COO, and Richard, to his credit, was actually good at his junior developer role, keeping his head down and doing solid work. I'd learned something important through all of this. The best revenge isn't destruction. It's reconstruction. Not tearing down the person who hurt you, but building something better from the pieces they left behind. The woman who'd stood at Easter brunch 9 months ago had been afraid. Afraid of losing her company, her security, her family's respect. But that fear had forced me to find a strength I hadn't known I possessed. Now, sitting in my office at Rich Tech, looking out at the city skyline, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was mine. Built by my hands, protected by my choices, sustained by my vision. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Lunch next week. I have someone I want you to meet. Brilliant entrepreneur, facing a business partnership betrayal, could use your advice." I smiled, typing my response. I'd love to help, because that was my new purpose. Not just building my own success, but helping other women protect theirs. Teaching them to document everything, trust their instincts, and never apologize for protecting what they'd created. The story that started with betrayal at a family brunch had become a story about reclaiming power, redefining success, and discovering that sometimes losing everything is just another way of saying you're finally free to choose what comes next. And what came next felt bright with promise and entirely my own.